Our guest today is Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil is a pagan and visionary artist. His work has appeared on CDs, in books, on TV, and in magazines in the UK, the USA, and in Australia. He is an expert on different occult and paranormal subjects. He is a co-host of the Paranormal Peep Show, and he is the co-author of Fairy Craft, Treading the Path of Fairy Magic. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Thank you for watching.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Unite Planet. Today our guest is Neil Geddes-Ward. Hello.
Hello. Neil. Hi Johnny. Hi Paul. How are you both?
Hi, Neil.
All well, good and well.
Well.
Now you investigate paranormal activity, if you like to call that, and I think you look at all different kind of things, don't you, as well? But is it like investigations with ghosts and I think fairies as well, isn't there? All sorts of UFOs, and you're an artist as well. You've got lots of strings to your bow.
Yeah, I know. I suppose at the very basic level, I'm a very creative individual. So I played in rock bands. I played bass guitar, play synthesizer a little bit, written songs and stuff. But I also do drawing and painting. I've done that ever since I was a kid. And the curiosity about the world, about me, was there from the very beginning, because I remember asking a question once to my mum, and I can't remember what age I was, but I was very little. I said, "Where was I before I was born?" And she said, "Oh, you didn't exist." And I said, "Well, I must have existed somewhere. I couldn't fathom not existing." So there was no answer for that at that point, but I kind of chewed it over for quite a lot of time. But I got into things like Star Trek and Doctor Who at a very young age, and I was always in amazement about the universe and the planets, and loved all that kind of stuff. But there was still the idea of where was I before I was born, and then I used to see things. We used to get like the Reader's Digest. Old people used to leave us Reader's Digests and pass them on to us, and I used to read through them sometimes as a kid. And what struck me is that sometimes they'd have an article in there where someone allegedly died on the operating table, and they'd go through this tunnel of light and communicate with some intelligence that was this light at the end of the tunnel, and say it's your time to go back or whatever. So that kind of thought, well, that's interesting. It sounds like they're sort of dying but somehow living again or something. What's happening there? And then as I got a little bit older, Doris Stokes, the famed medium of the early 80s, came onto the scene, and she appeared on various TV programs, and that sort of struck a chord with me, that she could communicate with these people. So we ended up getting the books as a family, and I used to read some of the books. My mum used to read them as well. And then also there was that really interesting program again in the early 80s, and by the time I was about sort of 16 or 17, the Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World program.
Oh, yes.
So a lot of people mention that as one of those influential kind of series where he would look at all the various mysteries, and one of them was life after death, and they covered the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, where you could see demonstrations of these people doing these amazing things. So obviously there was no internet back then. I just called up Directory Inquiries one day and said, "Could you give me the telephone number for the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, please?" And the rest is history. I basically ended up going there for readings on the train, and I ended up then, obviously, once I learned to drive, I could get about a bit more. And I used to see demonstrations of mediums at various spiritualist churches. And then it came down to the fact that after a while of having these readings, they said, "Oh, by the way, you can do this sort of stuff." I said, I've never seen a ghost or anything. But it transpired that they felt that I had some sort of ability. So when an opportunity came up to try and develop this ability, I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a go. So I joined what they call a psychic circle, which is just they will sit literally on chairs in a circle in someone's living room, and they have the medium, which is the person that communicates with the dead, if you like. I don't like using the word communicate with the dead because they're not dead, but they would communicate with the dead. That's a very negative term, but I'd say those on the other side. And then they would try and teach you how to develop that same ability. And so you do meditations, and then you try and tune into people and try and see if you can do what they call a reading on them and say, oh, I've got so here or whatever. And I always remember the first thing that convinced me that something was happening was that I had to meditate on someone that's sitting opposite me. I remember there was this old guy whose house we were in. His name was Eric, but he was probably in his late 60s, a retired chap in his late 60s. And I just remember going into this sort of vague meditation with my eyes shut and trying to concentrate on him, almost to the point of drifting off to sleep. And then I heard this Cockney EastEnders voice pop into my head, like a taxi driver type voice. All right, mate, you know. And the voice said to me, tell him he's got something wrong with his waterworks. And I thought, what? Where'd that come from? You know? And I thought, I've heard this thing before, is that when you've got something embarrassing to say to someone that's been given by a spirit, you have to what they call wrap the message up. So you kind of censor it a little bit and make sure that nobody else understands it, but only the person that you're giving the message would maybe understand it. You privatize it a little bit. Yeah. But I was a bit young then, and I didn't know how to sense that message. So I thought, well, what do I do? So rather than just say, oh, you got something wrong with your waterworks, Eric, I thought that might be a bit embarrassing to say that to him in front of all these people. So I just said something, oh, I think you'll see in the doctor about a problem. And that's all I could say, which is such a general thing. But I didn't really know what else it was. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a lot older than me, and he said, oh, he's probably got something wrong with his prostate gland. And I didn't even know what a prostate gland was at that time. And he said that can swell up in men when you get to that age, and it can affect your bladder, hence the waterworks aspect of it. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. So maybe I was right. But that was the thing that convinced me that, okay, I don't see ghosts or anything, but maybe I am communicating with something. So I went on and started carrying on in developing circles. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a professional medium that goes out on stage or tour or anything like that. There's plenty of other people far better at that than I can be. But I've done what they call open platform and stuff like that. But I've become fascinated with the whole thing and read so many different books on it, spoken to many people, been to demonstrations. And because I'm an artist, I've ended up with the point where I would go and sell my artwork as prints and things to people at events. And sometimes at these events, they would need speakers. And because of my knowledge of these things, I would negotiate a free table to sell my artwork. And I said, I'll do you a free talk. And we had struck that happy medium, pardon the pun. And so when I would do a talk on something spooky or whatever, people inevitably come up to me and tell me their kind of spooky stories, which over the period of many years has accumulated to a lot of different interesting stories, you see. So that's where I'm at. I'm not like a ghost investigator. I won't go around a house with electronic kit trying to detect ghosts and that. To me, whilst it might be interesting for the people that are doing that, and they can do, I'm not stopping them if they want to do, that's fine. To me, there's more definitive evidence that you can get by going to a seance or to a medium, because when the medium comes through with specific information for you that no one else in that room can possibly know, that to me is a much, much stronger piece of evidence than hearing a door creak in a haunted house, you see, where, you know, like when you go to these haunted houses or graveyards or where these people choose to do these things, it's inevitably cold and pissing down with rain and freezing. There's about 15 people there, and you can't rule out the fact that what you've heard on your tape recorder could be one of them, you know? Yeah. So and even if it is a creak of a door, you know, is it the door creaking, or is it some spook, or is it someone in your group that's done it accidentally? So I just prefer not to go around doing that kind of ghost research. I prefer to go to demonstrations. I've seen some really bad mediums, but I've also seen some really excellent mediums. And so that's where I'm at really with the whole thing.
So have you seen a ghost yourself or a UFO yourself? Have you ever any experiences?
Not seen any UFOs, although I'm greatly interested in the subject of UFOs, but I've never seen a UFO, so I'd love to see a UFO. Interestingly, Stanton Friedman, the great respected UFO researcher, was one of these people. He believed in UFOs, wrote books on them, did talks on them. He never saw a UFO himself, interestingly enough. But yes, I've never seen a UFO. I might have seen one thing that you might call a ghost. And I was staying at a house once in a bedroom. It wasn't my house or anything. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw baggy trousers standing in front of me with the top half of a person, but the top half of the person was in the shadows. I couldn't quite clearly see them, but they seemed to be talking to me. And I couldn't sort of make out clearly what they were saying. And I was sort of going, what? And then mumbling sort of noise. And I didn't know what it was. So eventually I sort of fell asleep. But it kind of like thought about it the next day and thought, was that me dreaming? Was I imagining things? Or did I really see something? So I'm not going to say, yes, I've definitely seen a ghost. But if you want to say, have you seen anything? Well, that's probably the nearest I've got to saying I've seen something. However, in the world of mediumship, it's not so clear cut that if you're a medium, you just see a ghost, because there are different aspects of it that you can feel the presence of people or you can feel their thoughts around you. And I'm one of those people. I feel the thoughts of people come through to me, and I might sometimes hear a phrase in my head or something. And that is a clue that someone's with me. And I felt people come through me, and the typical scenario that someone says, I felt a shiver up and down my spine. I've literally had that sort of where it literally takes your breath away because I felt something move into the presence of my energy or my aura or something.
I mean, I think you can sense a presence a lot of time, just day-to-day stuff. Sometimes you just feel like you're not alone, don't you? And I think you can kind of pick that up.
Yeah.
A lot, I feel that anyway. I don't know if you do as well. Yeah.
Well, they always say that we've got a sixth sense.
Yes.
So, sometimes you feel like you're being watched and things like that. And what I'm actually currently writing a book at the moment called Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits. And I start off with the preface in the book that we are being watched. That might sound a bit unnerving to people, but it seems to be that when mediums come through with messages, they say, I've got your mother here, your father, whoever it may be. And they said they was with you when you went to such and such a place. I mean, a remarkable piece of evidence came through many years ago. I was with my then girlfriend at the time. We'd gone to the grave of her grandfather who died like a year before. So this was the anniversary of his death. And of course, she was quite emotional being at the graveyard. And so we sat back in the car and she had a drink of water. She had a little cry, then she had a drink of water, and then she felt a little bit better. And then we went on our way. And then about a week later, we was at this demonstration of mediumship in a spiritualist church, and we were sitting right at the back, and this old medium suddenly came to us, and he said, I've got your grandfather with me, he said to my then girlfriend. And he said, he says that he was with you when you were at the grave. He said, don't think of him as in the ground because he's not there. He wants you to know he's not in the ground. He's actually here now. And he said that when you were there, he said that you had a cry. And he said, but then he said you had a little drink of water and you felt a lot better, didn't you? And I thought, bloody hell, that's exactly as it happened, So was he there hiding behind a gravestone watching us? I don't think so, So, yeah, some of the evidence is what I would call really specific evidence. I mean, I can relate loads of different stories, if you like. I mean, where do I start? Where do you want me to start?
Well, I mean, is that just with people contacting like with spirits that have gone to the other side? I mean, there's loads of accounts of that now. I find fascinating, because it's for me, everything is like energy. Everything is we're connected to everything. So I'm in the belief, when we pass from this body, it's just the physical that dies. That's because energy lives on. So it's great people can really connect with this quite in a definitive way. I mean, like we said, we can always sense something is with us, but to get that definitive connection that's powerful. I think it's quite powerful. So if you've got any of them kind of accounts,
okay. I mean, as I say, I've seen some really bad mediums that are just so bad they shouldn't even be there. But occasionally I've come across some really cracking accounts. This one was only a few years ago, so I'll relate this one because it's got a kind of bit of a double-edged sword to the story. I'd gone along to see this young medium, and he was probably about 23, only 23 years old, called Ross Bartlett from the Southampton area. And my girlfriend had seen him maybe about 3 months before, and he had given her a message, which was, I won't relate her message because it's private to her, I suppose. But she said, "Oh my God, this guy's good. He is so brilliant." So I said, "Well, I'll see if I can, talk to a friend of mine who runs spiritualist churches in the area that I live at, and maybe he could get him to come up." So to cut a long story short, it was arranged that this Ross Bartlett would come up and do a demonstration. Now, we found the building on the internet, the address we had to go to in the town of Ruislip. Now, I don't know Ruislip at all, but I saw this picture. It looked like a medieval old building with beams and things. So when we finally got there, there was actually 5 buildings that looked exactly like this. And it's like, oh my God, well, which building do we go in, So we was going in every single building. There was like a function in one room and a wedding going on the other. And we thought, oh, crikey. So we finally found the building. And it was amongst all these buildings. They're like a whole group of these buildings look the same. So we finally found it, and we got there a little bit late. The whole thing had started, you see. So there was this guy, an old guy on the door, and he had a white shirt on. And we said, "Oh, sorry, we're a bit late." And he goes, "Oh, there's a couple of chairs just down the side. Go and sit there." He says, "Come and give me the money at the end of it." We said, "Yeah, okay, thank you." So we kind of sneaked in a bit humblish, thinking, "Oh God, we're late," and sat down to the side of the medium, and he was already doing a reading for someone else. But then at the end of that, he suddenly turned around to me and he says, "I'm coming to the gentleman to my left." And I thought, oh God, I've only just turned up. I'm the late one, and here I am getting a reading ahead of everybody else. I felt a bit guilty. So he said, "I've got a lady here who wants to communicate with you, and her name is like Evelyn or something. I can't remember the name, but I'll say Evelyn for the sake of the discussion." And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know an Evelyn." And he said, "Well, she says she knows you." And he said, "She's talking about your brother Phil, because your brother Phil takes an interest in the history of the family." And I thought, crikey, well, I do have a brother Phil, and he does take an interest in the history of the family, because he goes around graveyards photographing graves of family members, that long departed sort of thing. So I thought, well, that made me sit up. Now I was recording this, so I've got it on recording for anybody that doubts it. The only thing I've got wrong is the name, and I just can't remember what it is. So anyway, then he said, "Evelyn, who's married to Edward." And I thought, sorry, I don't know an Edward in the family. And I really thought, this is confusing. Who is this Edward? So then he said, the interesting thing is, "Evelyn is talking about the name Morgan. You're connected with a Morgan. And Morgan is the name of my daughter." So I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I've got a daughter called Morgan." And then he said, "Now, do you see that man over there with the white shirt? And that's the man that was at the front door taking the money." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, that man over there, his name is Chris Hayes." Now, I know that name doesn't mean anything to you guys, but as soon as he said that, I thought, oh my God, I know the name of Chris Hayes. Now, this Ross Bartlett then said, "And Evelyn is telling me," and he was actually unsure himself. He wasn't sure if he was giving this information rightly, because to him it sounded too fantastic. But he said, you could see him thinking about this. He's going, "Okay, we'll go for it." He says, "See that man over there in the white shirt? His name is Chris Hayes." And I kind of gulped and went, "Yeah." He said, "They're telling me that Morgan, i.e. my daughter, is also connected to a Chris Hayes." And I said, "You're absolutely right. My daughter at that time was going out with a guy with the name of Chris Hayes as well." So I thought, what's the chances of that? What is the chance of that, being connected to me? I've just walked in the room. They're telling me the name of my daughter, Morgan. They're telling me the name of my brother. And they've just said my daughter's boyfriend, Chris Hayes, and the fact that the guy in the room is called Chris Hayes. They connected a 3-way thing going on there. And I thought, what is the chance of that? And there's all these skeptics that accuse them of cold reading or being vague or saying Barnum-type statements, which are very vague statements, saying, "Oh, you feel a lot better today," or you're shy in front of strangers or whatever. They're Barnum-type statements. But this was nothing like that. This was absolutely accurate. Now, the only thing I couldn't relate out of that reading was this name of Evelyn. And I couldn't work it out. Why can't I pick up this Evelyn? Because she's saying, she's upset that you don't recognize her. I thought, well, I don't know anyone called Evelyn. So when after this written, there was more information that come through, but I thought I'd just give you the stronger stuff there. After that reading, a few days later, I was with my mum, and I said to her, "Do you anyone called Evelyn in the family?" And I played her the recording so she could hear it. And she goes, "No, I don't know who Evelyn is." So then she rang around my family and she spoke to my dad's sister my Auntie Sue, as we call her. And she said, "Oh, yeah, I know who Evelyn is." And my mum said, "Well, who is it?" And she goes, "That's your Auntie Doris." And apparently, the lady that I grew up with, Auntie Doris, as I believe her name was Auntie Doris, her name wasn't that at all. Apparently, Doris was her middle name and Evelyn was her first name. And then it all fell into place because I remember Auntie Doris being married to Uncle Ted, Edward. Edward was mentioned in the reading. So apparently at some point in her history, she decided that she would use her middle name of Doris to be her first name, and Evelyn was chucked into the middle name, and no one ever knew that apart from my dad's sister. And yet here she was coming back with that information, Evelyn, because I had to then do my homework and backtrack it and try and find that, you see. So yeah. I mean, if it'd been great if Auntie Doris had said Auntie Doris with the missing fingers, because her little finger was missing from that hand and her little finger was missing from that hand. Now I didn't understand why as a kid. Why every time I see her she had a finger missing, and then a few weeks later she had that finger missing, and I thought she had some sort of weird hobby going on where she'd like to have her fingers taken off. But it turned out that apparently she had diabetes and her fingers had to be chopped off every few months by the surgeons to sort of keep her going. But I just thought it was some weird hobby that she had going. But yeah, that was her coming back to me all those years later, and saying a kind of bit of a cryptic clue to who she was.
Wow.
And then connecting up the name Chris Hayes to my daughter's boyfriend, which was absolutely fascinating. So it's evidence like that from mediums that you think, well, okay, if this is some sort of clever, really clever sort of ploy, that's a lot of planning gone into that.
Yeah.
And also the thing is, I arrived late to that building. Now I could have walked around there and thought, oh, sod it, I can't find the place, I'm giving up, I'm going home, because I hadn't lost any money because I didn't pay any money. You know, we'll just go for a drink out or something instead. But I persevered and we got there, and it's almost as if that they had that information waiting and they pounced on me as soon as I got through the door virtually, because that was a really good hit for them to get across, and they weren't going to let that go. They said, no, this is good because he's called Chris Hayes and so is his daughter's boyfriend called Chris Hayes, and this is a really good connection to make. So that's a really sort of synchronistic or serendipity type of moment, you see.
I think it was obviously it was meant to be there as well. You know, it was the way circumstances were dictated. It seemed in a spiritual sense that you were meant to be there. Like maybe throughout that day you was guided, you know, to be there because their messages were there for you. You know, I mean, that's what I thought. You know, I think that's how certain things work.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The skeptic angle is that, you know, it's got to be tested. There's got to be at least 5 scientists there and things like that. Sometimes you just can't arrange that sort of thing of getting 5 scientists in a room when that sort of thing happens. And basically, even if 5 scientists were there and they said, yeah, this is true, the skeptics won't want to believe it. It's still that sort of thing. They just will not accept it. So you just have to say, okay, well, you know, you're the one that's losing out on it, really. I'm not saying they're going to go to hell when they die. There's just that when you pass over, apparently, if you kind of open-minded about this sort of stuff, it's easier to accept it. So that when you do transition over, you would kind of go, oh, yeah, I've passed over to the other side. This is heaven, spirit world, afterlife, call it what you will. But when those people are skeptics pass over, they think, what's happened? What's happened? You know, and they just can't work out what's happened to themselves. And apparently there are guides or teachers on hand that when you do pass over, they help you to the other side. I mean, an interesting thing that happened actually concerns my mum, and it concerns what people would refer to the Ouija board. The team that I worked with on this, they prefer to call it the spirit board. But back in 2016, my mum wasn't feeling very well. I was actually at their house that evening because I got my Apple Mac computer in one of the old family bedrooms, and I was editing a video. Funny enough, it was Ben Emlyn Jones, your friend of mine.
Oh,
I was editing a video with Ben interviewing someone, and I was completing that, and I suddenly got my dad or my mum shouted up the stairs saying, do you want to come downstairs and watch Time Team, because it's featuring a local town which is close to us here. So I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I took a break and made him a cup of tea. And we watched Time Team. After about an hour, I said, right, who wants another cup of tea? Made them both a cup of tea. And then I went back upstairs and carried on editing the video. Now, my mum normally went to bed about 10:30 at night, and my dad would stay on and watch football or war documentaries, anything like that. But on this particular occasion, he shouted up the stairs at 10:30. He says, "Neil," he says, "your mum's not feeling well, and she wants me to go to bed with her." I went, "Oh, okay." And I thought that was a bit odd. Why does my mum suddenly want my dad to go to bed with her? It's like I almost got the thing that she sounded a bit frightened, but I didn't know why. Because when she's not felt well before, she's just gone to bed. But on this particular occasion, she felt a bit disturbed that she wanted my dad to be there. So she made it slowly up the stairs, and I was sitting in this bedroom, and I had the door ajar. So I just sort of poked my head around the door and said, "Oh, I hope you feel better in the morning." But as I said it, I had this weird feeling inside of me, like something you just couldn't sort of ignore, that I thought, I don't feel sincere saying that. I don't feel right saying that. Something in me don't feel right. And I wasn't sure what it was. So there's two things. Why is my dad going to bed with her at night at this time? And why don't I feel quite happy about what I've just said? So anyway, I finally went to bed about an hour or two after that. I actually went and slept on the sofa because all the other spare bedrooms have been turned into model rooms or God knows what else, edit suites and things. So I went and slept on the sofa, put the earphones on, was listening to something on YouTube, but I heard this weird knocking noise in the background. Eventually, I thought, what's all that bumping? My dad was shouting downstairs that he couldn't wake my mum up and she had fainted. So to cut a very long story short, I went up there and looked, and she was absolutely as white as a sheet. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh my God, I think she's dead." And, I felt her neck. There was nothing happening. So we rang the ambulance came, and they were trying to resuscitate her and things like that, but to no avail. So by about 4:00 in the morning, she was declared dead, which is obviously a big shock to us, and you're sitting there and you're waiting for undertakers and policemen. I don't know if you know this, but when someone dies suddenly at home, policemen have to be called by the ambulance service because they have to rule out any foul play. And so policemen have to be called and they check on her and stuff like that. So anyway, fast forward about 10-12 months later, I was at my girlfriend's place in Dorset, and we suddenly get a phone call, and the phone call was from a friend of hers, and she said, "Heavenly Voices," now this is the team that have this spirit board, we had heard of this team, they're based in Poole in Dorset, "Heavenly Voices have got a cancellation, and would we be the extra bums on seats, because they've asked for someone out on Facebook if they want to take up this spare slot." And so a friend of a friend basically said, "Yes, we'll do it." And they said, "Well, look, if you do it, you've got to get 4 other people to be there with you to make it worthwhile for us to come over." So a quick scramble on the phone calls roundabout, and we were called up to be those extra bums on seats. So we said, "Yeah, okay." So I just took my tape recorder along there as a kind of an emergency thing. They didn't really know me. I'd never met them before. And all these people were having their readings. And so I was like the last, but all their readings were coming through absolutely accurate. It's vital information. So my mum, I say my mum, I didn't know who it was were coming through, but the letter M was given, spelt out on this board, and my mum's name was Margaret. And now they had a protocol where they would say, "Right, can you give your son's middle name, his date of birth, and something else?" But my mum broke that protocol. She just whizzed through, and the glass spelt out with all our fingers on this glass, "Hi, son." Now, my mum never called me son ever in her lifetime. She'd say Neil, whatever. She'd never say son. But when I thought back to it, I thought what she's doing is making me aware presumably there's only so much energy left. So you try and do it in the best way possible. So she wanted to let me know, it was mum coming through. So how do you let you know? You say son. Because there's only one person in the spirit world that's going to call me son, because my dad's here on earth. It's got to be my mum. So I knew straight away it's my mum. She said, "Hi, son." And then they said to her, "Can you say what Neil's middle name is?" And the glass whizzed round, and it couldn't give the information. So, "Oh, it's fake, they can't get information." But what it is, I've noticed, and this is something I've sort of experimented with, is that when there's 2 pieces of information to give, they're pondering about which it is. Because the thing is, I've got 2 middle names. And so she's thinking, I presume, which middle name do I give? Alexander or Lyndon? because I'm Neil Alexander Lyndon Geddes-Ward. So she went to the A first of all, then it went a bit skewy, and I think that information, it confuses the energy in some way. So I said, oh look, don't worry about giving my middle name. What's the name of my dad? And then suddenly, without fail, it went to Bryan, which is Brian. Now, a lot of people spell the name Brian Brian, but my dad spells it with a Y, you see. So she spelt that absolutely correctly. So as another verification question, I said, okay, what's the name of my brother born in 1968? And without fail, it whizzed through and said Philip, which is the name I mentioned to you earlier. She spelt Philip, born in 1968. So then it was a kind of free-for-all chat between me and my mum, who'd only died like 10 or 11 months earlier. And so one of the first things, because like when you suddenly presented this, you're thinking, oh my God, what do I ask? Suddenly, what do I ask my mum who's in a spirit world? What do I say to her? So obviously it's quite an emotional and uplifting time. So I said, have you met your mum and dad, my grandparents? And she said, yes. And then she volunteered extra information. And this bit shocked me because a few months before, or a few weeks before my mum died, my brother, who's also into the psychic stuff, he said he smelt the tobacco smoke of my granddad. That's my mum's mum. My granddad, Bob, as well. He could smell that around the house. And so that's normally a sign from the spirit world that says that if you smell something from a relative, that's normally a sign that someone's going to die. And it's like them letting you know as best way they can that they're preparing to bring someone over by giving you a clue. So they'll try and do it in either visually, they might show you a face or something, or sometimes the easiest way is to let you have what they call a clairsentience, which is where you smell things. And he could clearly smell the tobacco smoke of my granddad, Bob. So I assumed from that, after she died, I assumed, well, maybe my granddad, Bob, had come to collect her from the spirit world. So it came as a complete shock that when I was on this session, she had suddenly said, yes, my mum came and met me. I went, oh, well, that's nice. But I thought it might be my granddad. I thought, bloody hell, my granny Bob, as we called her, came and collected my mum. So she obviously took her to the spirit world, you see, and when you go there, there's always someone there to collect you, whether it's a spirit guide or a relative or a friend. There's always someone there to show you the ropes, as it were. Imagine, like as a kid, you're going to go to the big school now, and you might have an older brother or sister who already goes to that school, so they'll take you there on that first day and show you around. It's that kind of thing. That's the kind of feeling I get from that sort of thing. But she came through with some absolutely brilliant, cracking evidence, and then like a year later, I had a second reading from her. And I really put her through her paces this time, which you've obviously seen that reading, which I sent you the video for. That was the second reading. What was your thoughts on that?
Brilliant. Yeah, actually very, very emotional, to be honest with you. And lots of basically proof it was genuine. Yeah, I mean, it was... I was trying to watch it, and I'm thinking, like, when it was going round and round and round, she was actually trying to think of the answers, like you said, about the middle names as well. She was like, I don't know which one to give. I can see the confusion.
Yes, yeah, and a bit of interest in that one is that if you recollect that, as I said, I'm an artist, and we grew up watching Star Trek, and she loved Star Trek, and I kind of got Star Trek from her, really. But she always had a bit of a crush on Mr. Spock.
That's right.
We used to laugh about it, And she wasn't really an artist. I got my artistic ability from my dad. So I thought, I'm going to ask a really interesting question that, no one in this room would know. It's only me that knows about this. But I remember as a kid that we had this old fireplace. There's no central heating. But eventually I think we did get a gas fire at some point. But to stop the chimney blowing out soot or whatever, or drafts coming down the chimney, we put a board in front of it, like a bit of hardboard. And we never had reams of paper like we do today, like people have reams of paper for their printers. We just had scraps of envelopes to draw on in the 70s as a kid. But for one weird reason, I don't know why, she took the board out of this fireplace, and with a felt tip pen, she drew a really good large likeness of Leonard Nimoy, the actor, as Mr. Spock from Star Trek, complete with the pointed ears and everything. And we all looked and go, oh, that's really good, Mum, that's really good. And anyway, she forgot about it. Of course, the board had to go back in front of the fireplace to stop the draft coming out. So it was put back there, and we all forgot about it, And then years later, the house was refurbished, central heating was put in, and the board must have been thrown away, I guess. So I remembered this board episode with this picture, and I said, do you remember drawing a picture on the board? And she says, yes, or something like that, she said. So I said, can you give me the name of the person you drew? Now, of course, the glass whizzed round because she didn't know whether to say Mr. Spock or Leonard Nimoy. So that's why you saw me in the video say, okay, just give me the actor's name. Don't worry about the other name. And that's that thing. Which one do I? And it causes like a bit of a time lag about which one do I do. So as soon as I said, just give me his first name, she spelled Leonard. She spelled it slightly wrong, but that was good enough for me. Leonard Nimoy. She got one letter wrong, but that, I mean, what's the chances of that happening? And the glass is moving. You can see the glass is moving. We're trying to keep up with it. So it's not me physically pushing that glass around. It was quite amazing evidence. And of course, there was other questions there that I thought was cracking evidence. And my girlfriend said, I've drawn a picture. Who was it of? And she said me or something like that, and she had done a portrait of her. And then I said, okay. And the other interesting piece of information, again, concerns Chris Hayes, who we mentioned in the earlier story, because I said to my mum, where have I been recently? And she put Orkney Islands. Now, for those that don't know, the Orkney Islands are a group of islands off the north coast of Scotland. Now, I used to live there some years ago, so my kids still have grown up there. So I go and visit them 2 or 3 times a year, except obviously this year in this COVID-19 year, bloody anything. So I said to her, where have I been? And she put Orkney Islands. Now I say Orkney, I never say Orkney Islands. So again, she said it in her typical way, Orkney Islands. And you heard the guy Andy in the talk say, "Where's Orkney? Where's Orkney?" And I said, and I explained to him, so he didn't even know what we were talking about. And I said, "And who have I gone to see there?" And she spelled out daughter. And so the girl who's with the Heavenly Voices team, Lisa, says, "And what's the name of his daughter?" And she's correctly spelled out Morgan. And then my mum took it over. She wasn't going to be asked any more questions. She was going to tell you her opinions. She said, "I like her boyfriend." So that reminded me of a story, is that when I first introduced my daughter's boyfriend to my mum, I said, "Oh, Mum, I'm going to introduce you to Morgan's boyfriend. His name is Chris." She goes, "Okay, so I'll be bringing him along later tonight, and you'll meet him." So of course he comes in. This is obviously when she was alive. He comes in the living room, and she goes, "Hello, Stuart." And I went, "Stuart, where'd you get the name Stuart from?" And poor Chris was embarrassed because obviously that's not his name. She goes, "I don't know." She goes, "I thought his name was Stuart." I said, "No, I told you his name was Chris." So of course it became a bit of a family joke. So of course in this reading that you saw on the video, I said, "What did you call him?" And she said, "Stuart." And I said, "Yeah, and what's his real name?" She put Chris. I said, "Yeah, you embarrassed him, poor boy." And then you see the glass move, and she goes, "Was funny." And that's an expression that she always used to say, "Yeah, that was funny." It's always so the character of her came through that reading, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and also the eagerness as well, that she wanted to give the message to you. It was very obvious.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there's lots of people that say, "Oh, they're just feeding you information, or your information is being picked up and they're moving the glass around." But I say, well, look, hang on. If Heavenly Voices are conning me, the duo that do this, they've got to go through a hell of a lot of personal, family, secret history, little anecdotes that nobody else. They didn't know about that board on the fireplace with Leonard Nimoy's drawing on it. They didn't know that my mum got Chris's name wrong as Stuart and things like that. How would they possibly know that? You see, that is absolutely personal information. And that wasn't just for me. My girlfriend had a reading before that, and everything was personal to her and all the other people that had a reading as well. So that to me was really, really strong evidence that there's something coming through. And of course, I've had readings and demonstrations of mediumship before through other people. I mean, a few weeks after she died, I think after the first Heavenly Voices session, I was actually at this. My girlfriend said, "Oh, do you fancy going to one of these haunted pub sessions?" I'm not really into going around haunted pubs, but she wanted to go, so I said, "All right, I'll come with you." So it was this medium guy that we'd seen once before at one of the spiritualist churches, and he was doing this thing where we're going round and trying to listen out for noises and stuff like that. Now, at the time, I'd got not this phone. I got another old mobile phone, and it would want to do an automatic backup on it, and I could never work out how to figure that to let it do it. But it would alert you to the fact that it wanted to do an automatic backup. It would do like a little noise, a little chime noise, and it'd sound like bottles. It'd go ding-ling-ling like that. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it would do that quite without me, intentionally pressing any buttons. It'd just do it by itself. So I'm walking around this haunted pub, and everyone's trying to listen for the sound of the dead barmaid who hung herself because she was pregnant or something stupid like that, And then you hear this ding-ling, and this girl goes, "Oh, I can hear bottles. I can hear bottles." And of course, it was my bloody phone going off, you see. And this is why I don't like doing these sorts of things, because they're just random noises sometimes, things you can't control. But what was interesting about that, which was totally unexpected, is that he got out a small table, and put it on one of the pub's tables, because by this time, all the people that in the pub had gone home, and it was just us researchers, if you like. And he put it on this pub table. The idea is that we're all going to put our hands on this table and do what they call table tilting. And now, when you've done table tilting before, people will lean over and it hurts your back after a while, lean and hold your hands on it. So he obviously recognised this fact. So by putting it on a secondary large table, we're putting our hands up there instead of down there. We're not hurting our back so much, but it still makes your arms ache. But the table started to rock backwards and forwards, and there's 3 or 4 people with their hands around this table, and the medium isn't even touching it. He's sitting further away, having a drink, and he's just sort of saying, "Yeah, do that, and I'll watch you." So we're doing it, and the table starts leaning forward towards me. And he said, "That's normally an indication," he said, "that there's someone coming through and they want to speak to you. The fact it's leaning towards you." So through a process of elimination, I said, "Are you someone that knows me?" And it leant forward. So I took that to be a yes, because there's no letters it can spell out. It's literally a rocking motion. So I said, "Are you male?" And it didn't move. I said, "Are you female?" And it moved towards me. "Are you a relative?" And it moved towards me. "Are you my mum?" And it moved towards me. So I thought, right, this sounds like it's my mum coming through this table now. So again, through a process of elimination, I said, "I want you to move the table towards me if I give you a name, a word that's familiar to you. I'm going to give you some names of roads. And when we get to a road that you recognize, I want you to move that table." So I said different names of roads. I went through about 3 or 4. And as soon as I got to the name Lovell Road, the table moved towards me. And the reason it got to Lovell Road and the table moved is that's the road she lived in. So that was why it had a bearing on her. So my mum was now trying to communicate through this table, bless her, which was totally unexpected. But that's a long, lengthy process, because it's a case of 1 rap for yes, 2 for, it takes ages to get any sort of message through. But other people started getting their fathers through and things like that. And through a process of elimination, they managed to almost have a chat with them just by this table rocking. But the other astounding thing about this table thing is that a table has 4 legs, and when the table leans up, it's leaning up on 2 legs at such an angle that it would fall over. Gravity would fall over, and all you're doing is resting your fingers gently like that. So there's no way you're holding that table up with your fingers. And the guy who was the medium says, "Now I defy you to try and push that table back onto the floor. So where it's on 2 legs, push it back so it's rested on all 4 legs." So I tried pushing it, and honestly, it was almost like as if this thing was glued in position, which to me defies physics, because you should be able to push that thing back. But somehow there's some force there, some energy, whatever you want to call it. It was stopping me pushing that table back in its normal position. So that's what they call physical mediumship, where physical things are happening. It's not just mental clairvoyance, which is where people are reading through their mind. This is something physical, and that's also the same thing for the Ouija board or the spirit board session. That's called physical mediumship as well.